So if you say Jamie Lewis to pretty much anybody, the response will inevitably be, "Oh, I love her." Jamie Lewis is one of the good ones, and we sit down in Shea Lewis with all of her cats, talk cannabis. Enjoy.
I am in the house of Lewis. I am in Jamie Lewis's house.
You are in my home right now. Not very many people get to experience Jamie Lewis's home for many reasons, mainly because I don't clean as much as I should, but I did pick up a little for you, so yeah.
And we appreciate that. There are at least 3 cats.
12 in the basement,
Right.
and then 3 here. Billy, which is actually a great story about Billy. He's actually the reason for the brand of my company. The white furry butterball to the left here actually sort of resembles a mountain goat in some way, shape, or form, which is also why I lovingly call my company and the boys in the kitchen my little Billy goats. So yes, you get to meet Billy. Not very many people get to meet Billy.
The muse of Mountain Medicinals.
The muse, in fact, he is. I'm not so sure he's as excited as he should be. We try to keep it at bay in the house. We don't want his ego to grow. He's running the show around these parts as it is. So
we just let him be.
let him be. Let him be. Yes.
So let's get into this Billy Goat thing. It's a very strong part of your brand. Why?
It is. When we came out, I'm originally from California, but when we came out to Colorado, I started investigating various ideas from a marketing perspective, and what I was looking for mountain medicine. And I focused really heavily on a few concepts. And the one that always stuck with me was the mountain goat is the state animal for Colorado. So in doing some research on the mountain goat, it is a resilient animal who can live in all climates and can climb to the top of almost any mountain. So in my mind, that sort of encompasses the idea behind mountain medicine, starting from the very beginning in medical, now in recreational, and sort of going through the trials and tribulations of what it means to operate in marijuana. I found the mountain goat to sort of follow suit with that kind of image. So that's where the mountain goat came from.
I love it. All right. So you keep saying that you're from California. So let's go all the way
Can
back.
I say that once or twice? Maybe once.
It could have been twice. It could have been maybe an additional time before recording. But But where are you from? Let's go all the way back.
I am from a really small town in the Central Valley called Waterford, California. It's about an hour from Yosemite National Park. So right at the base of the foothills that roll into Gold Country and then eventually into the Sierra Nevadas. So I'm about 2 hours from San Francisco, an hour from Yosemite National Park, and don't be offended, boys and girls, if you've never heard of it. It is a very small town, population probably around 6,000, and that's where I was born and raised.
And now $59.99.
Yes, exactly, -1. Although I still sort of claim residency in Waterford. Don't tell the girls back home that I've relocated.
All right, I won't. I promise. But so growing up, it sounds like a little bit of a rural existence. What were mom and dad like?
Mom and dad are amazing. I am one of those fortunate stories where I don't have any bad mom and dad experiences. I'm sure my parents would counter that as I might have been a little difficult to raise, but I make up for it now. I'm definitely a loving daughter to my parents. My father was blue collar. He worked in various factories, and he was a truck driver and a bus driver for most of my life. He's a Vietnam vet. He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, so I grew up with somebody with PTSD, which was both interesting and an experience all in itself. And then my mother was a school teacher. She works in the rural town of Waterford. She's a special aide for the resource side of things. She is an amazing woman. She's Irish Catholic, so I was born and raised Catholic. And then my father's a little bit on the hippie side of things. So I had sort of a dual raising, if you will. I had a mother who raised me in the Catholic Church and a father who liked to pray by the trees. So it was an amazing experience. I have a very close relationship with my mom and dad. They've been 100% supportive in anything and everything I do. I also like to attribute to my mother my great independence and alpha female approach to most things. She was one to raise me with, being a strong, independent woman. So for that, I'm very blessed.
Yeah, and you certainly are strong and independent. I think that anybody that knows you even a little bit knows that and can see that. But you're talking about these two wonderful people, these two laid-back people. Where does the edge, the sense of humor come from?
I think my grandpa. I mean, in all honesty, my grandpa Lewis was a funny motherfucker. Can I say that?
Yeah, I think you should.
Say that. He had this sort of slap style humor about him, and on the Irish side, no offense to any of those that are Irish, there's a bit of a dry sense of humor that comes from that. So I will say that my grandfather Lewis and my father as well are both very funny. I was blessed with the Lewis humor and the Lewis sense of direction. My mother has a terrible sense of direction. She's aware of that, so it's okay to go to radio with that. But I think that the humor comes from my father, and a lot of it too. I mean, just growing up and being able to balance between, seriousness and humor. I think humor is the one thing that carries me in this industry specifically, because you really have to love what you do in this industry. And at the same time, you've got to have a little bit of fun with it, because so much of this is, it's very difficult to maneuver through.
Indeed, especially on the edible side, and we'll certainly get to all of that. As you're growing up, though, you mentioned that you were fun to raise. What kind of kid were you? What were your interests?
Ooh, do you ask this of everybody? This is a great question. What kind of kid was I? I was stubborn and determined. Never took no for an answer. My parents could probably write a book on that in itself. I always had a large circle of friends that I was around, but the one thing I do have and have always had is a good core of loyal friends, right? So you have those friends that you grew up with from the very beginnings in kindergarten, and I still have a very strong relationship with 4 to 5 very important ladies in my life. You know who you are. And from that, I just, growing up in a small community too also helped with an understanding of respect and friendship. And I grew up in a very loving environment. I'm very close to both my sisters. And I think all of that just overall centered me to be a well-rounded person.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can see that. The 3 girls, though, 3 sisters. Where do you line up?
I am the middle sister. Yes, the infamous middle sister. Always seeking the attention I never got. My older sister, Becky, who is 42 now, is mentally retarded. So I grew up with that aspect in my life. She's an amazing soul. She has the mentality of a 4-year-old, but at the same time, she is charismatic and just a love button to be around. And then my younger sister and I were really close in age. So we were only 2 years apart. So we had that very typical relationship growing up, the stealing of clothes, the not wanting to share hairbrushes, and the different circles of friends that we trekked around in. My sister was a bit of a goody two-shoes, so she was the shining light growing up. I was a little more on the wilder side, if you will. I like to have a lot of fun. I still do like to have a lot of fun. So I think that was the biggest problem, maybe a little too much fun.
Too much fun, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. I've never spoken to anyone that has mentally retarded sibling. What was that like to have in the home, and what's your relationship with her now?
Oh, my relationship with her right now is amazing. Growing up, it wasn't different for us. Growing up in a rural community, not being around a lot of people, my friends just always accepted that was who she was, and how we were raised it was never a conversation. I remember it was probably about 10 or 11 that we had the conversation with my mom and dad that my sister's different, but it didn't go beyond that. It was just like this understanding of who she was. I had the amazing opportunity to grow up with Special Olympics, which is a organization that does Olympic athletes like events all across the country, and my father was actually a track coach for Special Olympics. So I grew up with that sort of environment, going to the events, being around a large group of them. I find them to be amazing people to be around. They're delightful souls. Having conversations with them, I'm really comfortable around them. When we got to high school is when I started to notice the difference and the teasing and the not really understanding of who she was. I then, just being the sister that I am, and very protective of that in her. But because, again, the high school we went to was fairly small as well, it was just an understanding and an education process for most people. But I feel very blessed to have that angle, just because I know what it means to be around them, and it's amazing.
How did you respond to the teasing? Was that, were you a fighter, or, how did you kind of respond?
I've never really been a fighter. Maybe it's because I'm a big girl. Most people don't challenge me. I was never big on fighting. I think my angle, even now to this day, is, figuring out where they come from and then trying to educate them on how that's not okay. There wasn't a lot of that growing up that I experienced, but there were certain instances where there were groups, the cool kids, if you will, that certainly liked to pick on those that weren't cool. And I think that me and my girlfriends were pretty good at explaining that that's not okay. So it was just a simple conversation. And most of it, too, is, the interesting thing is people just don't understand how to interact with people with mental disabilities. And you can almost see it, too. There's this bit of uncomfortableness that people have where they don't know how to engage or how to talk, and it sort of comes off as standoffish. But being raised around Special Olympics, and I just feel blessed, because even when I see them now, various groups of them that go around the city in Denver, I love engaging. So for that, I'm fortunate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So through high school, any interests there as far as sports or theater, or where were you? Where'd you find yourself?
I really wasn't much into the curricular activities outside of school.
Those are extracurricular activities.
Those extracurricular. I thought they were just part of the whole thing. I did not run for city council, contrary to what many people might believe now, because I'm very active in the cannabis industry. I'm not a morning person, so in all honesty, it was a little rough to catch that bus in the morning. I think my parents were delighted when I finally got my driver's license, and my first car was a VW Volkswagen camper bus, a 1970s camper bus. So that sort of is a bit cliche, I guess, but God, I love that vehicle. So I eventually became the bus rider to corral the rest of the girls to get to school by at least 10, even though school started at 8.
And so then you have this camper, this VW camper, so that begs the cannabis question. When did that come into your life?
Ooh, that's a good question. Gosh, I don't know if I should say this publicly. Can we say this? I've been consuming cannabis for a very long time.
It's a good way to put it.
How about that? Let's stick with that one. Whether or not it was during high school or after, I won't admit to any of that, but I have had a true love for my sister plant, for sure.
Indeed. Okay. All right. So we were in high school. We have the VW bus. Any specific VW bus story that you'd like to highlight here for us?
I think just having a bus that could fit 15 of my closest friends is enough story in itself. There was very little we couldn't attend or make it to in one vehicle on, literally $2 worth of gas. So I had a lot of fun. With that vehicle. And I really wasn't much of a hippie. So I know the VW bus goes hand in hand. Right after the VW bus, I started to get into classic cars and more towards the rockabilly. I've always been rockabilly. I love the vintage. So the VW is really my only cliche sort of relation to the hippie aspect, other than my father and Grateful Dead piece of it. But yeah, that was a good car.
Okay. And then as far as rockabilly vintage cars, what was the next car that came upon you, or you came upon?
I had a 55 Chieftain that I loved.
That's cool.
That's a cool car. It had a 302 engine in it, so it was fast. And I loved that car to death. It was a really good one. I had a 1968 Mercury Cougar at one point, which is a little bit more of the muscle car, more on the female edge, obviously.
It's a cougar.
It's a cougar. That says it all right there, ladies and gentlemen. Although I wasn't really a cougar. Am I a cougar now?
You might be. What year were you born?
78. I still think I have about a 10-year mark before. I'm not going to call myself a cougar till 47.
No, I think that's fair. I feel like if you were to be with someone in their early 20s, you've got the possibility of being a cougar now.
Okay.
But I feel like legitimately you're not just yet.
Okay, so I know what to look for then
Indeed.
to get that status, if you will, please.
Yeah.
I like that. Younger men are easier. No offense, boys, but
You say younger men are easier?
I think they're easier to handle. Yeah.
How so?
I just think that they're easier to be told what to do, right? They're not the old dogs teaching new tricks too. They haven't been conditioned. They're not as beat up either, you know.
Interesting.
Can we put that on the air?
I like to think though that when I passed 30, that's when I learned how to listen. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It must just be the tone of which the women are directing you. I don't seem to have that problem.
Okay, fair enough. So we have these kind of really cool cars.
Really cool cars. I love the rockabilly music. I love the twang, country twang. I love that. My grandfather played the fiddle and harmonica, very much on that bluegrass side of things. So I grew up with country in the background and a lot of Grateful Dead. I can actually recite the 72 Europe tour album, though I would not like to. No offense to the Deadheads out there, but I'm not so much of a fan of the Grateful Dead as I am Hank Williams.
I see. Okay, fair enough. I also now I am a fan of the Europe '72 album.
Are you really?
Yeah. So I can rehearse it. Did you say, or recite it? I think, but that's because of my enjoyment of it.
Enjoyment, yes. Mine is sitting around the Thanksgiving Day table, wondering how many more times we have to hear it.
Yeah.
Gosh, my father and I go back and forth about this all the time. I love that I had that experience growing up, though. I mean, I had this sort of like very country experience, and then my father, from his experience, in Vietnam and just that whole aspect of the PTSD, but also the cultural thing growing up so close to San Francisco. And, the first concert I went to was with him when I was fairly young.
Was it a Dead show? Or?
It was a sort of jam show, if you will, but it was an experience. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. Well, I think we'll leave that there. As far as, did you go to college?
I went to junior college. I spent probably about 2 years in junior college fumbling around, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And then I started to really, I grew up sort of on the poor side of things, although I didn't realize that until I got to high school. Growing up in a rural community, we all sort of were in the same economical class, and I didn't realize that there were things that we grew up without, which just is such a strong point for my parents, because growing up in a loving environment is obviously more important. But I was a fat kid from day one and loved really good food. So when I was going to junior college, I started working in these really high-end restaurants in the town that I was going to college in, and sort of really got a passion for cooking. So I spent 2 years in junior college. I did a little bit of dabbling in philosophy, and that was sort of where I was sticking around in, more or less. And then started cooking and investigated further my love for cooking. I decided to go to the Culinary Art Institute in San Francisco, and I moved to San Francisco when I was somewhere around 23 or 24, and spent 2 years in that program. And while I was going to school there, I lived in this amazing flat near Upper Haight, and had 4 amazing roommates who were also all chefs. And we sort of came together and created this amazing living experience, obviously being a little younger and hanging out with other chefs. There were a lot of good times in the apartment, but also just my love for food and being dropped into San Francisco, which is like a mecca for amazing chefs and cuisine. And I came in right around the time Alice Water was starting to do that local sustainability aspect. So getting in touch with local ingredients and doing everything within 100 miles and cooking seasonally. I worked under some really phenomenal chefs there. I wanted to go for the James Beard Award, be that rock star in the culinary scene. And it also is where I got this amazing work ethic too. Like, 12 to 14-hour days as a chef is not unheard of. And having a team of people that you direct or work with is something that I've taken with me even now. It's important to who you bring on the team and how well you work together. So I had a lot of good times, but mostly the experience is what I take away from that. I mean, that work ethic is what got me to where I am today.
Yeah, talk more about that, because that is chefs are very well known for a hefty work ethic. When did you first realize that being in the kitchen was going to be a different type of experience? I would imagine somewhere along the schooling line, right?
Well, prior to going to school, I had worked in kitchens in Modesto, and that's the town where I went to junior college in, and going to school from, 8 in the morning until 2, and then going in the kitchen from 2 until 1 o'clock was a general schedule of mine. So that sort of started the tone for it. And then once I got to San Francisco, I was working 2 jobs and going to school full time. So I didn't have a lot of downtime. My weekends were spent in the kitchen. And I think the one thing that got me through that was all my roommates were doing the same thing. So we were all on the same schedule, and we created this sort of communal lifestyle of grocery shopping and who can do what on this and who can take care of this. So it was really helpful. And I'm still very close friends with most of them who are pretty high up on the chef chain in San Francisco now, which means anytime you want to go eat in the city, just give me a call. I've got some relationships there.
Well, would we know some of the names and some of the restaurants?
I'm not so sure that they're so high up, but Morgan Mueller is one of my dearest friends, and he is the executive chef of Jardiniere, which is a really famous restaurant in San Francisco. He's probably one to pay attention to. A little plug there for you, Mueller.
Yeah, there you go. And did you meet Alice Waters or no?
I have never officially met Alice Water, but I'm a huge fan.
Okay.
I worked under Bruce Hill, which is another famous, fabulous chef in San Francisco. Laurent Ducros, which ran the 5th floor for a period of time and has also received 2 restaurants in France that he operated under, had received 4 stars from the Michelin judging of things. So I worked under him, and he was insane. Like, just literally insane. He would bike from Marin to the kitchen, be there by like 8 in the morning, and then he would leave after all of us at like midnight. I mean, I don't know when he ever slept, if he slept. And biking from Marin to downtown San Francisco in itself is a bit of a workout. So
For those not from the Bay Area, how long of a trip is that?
gosh, it's like a 5-mile bike ride, if not longer. I mean, to and from. And I mean, he was insane. He actually had a metal table that he would work off of, and it had been there for just less than 2 years. And there was actually a divot in the stainless steel table from where he had buffed it out so much, just from wiping and cleaning. I learned never to come out of the walk-in without food in a container of some way, shape, or form. And ceps or mushrooms in French. I learned that one too.
Well, what's the whole thing with the walking out with food, and what's that lesson?
Well, I think the lesson is that from the time you grab the product from the farmer's market or from shipping and receiving in bigger restaurants, it has to be of quality and cared for like a baby. So it comes all the way into, making sure that it's properly put to bed in the walk-in, as well as properly carried to the prep table. And it sounds silly, but it sets the tone in really taking this great pride for what you put in your products. So I came out of the walk-in once with some ceps, which I had to, Google. It was before Google, so I was actually asking one of the line cooks what the fuck that was, and then getting them and carrying them in my hand to the prep station. And I will say that was the last time I ever did that, and being screamed at that this is my child and it should be cared for in a better manner than mangled and manhandled by my mitts. So
In what kind of accent?
in a French accent,
Right.
that luckily I only understood a few of the words, because if I would have understood the whole thing, I probably would have been in tears. But due to the lack of sleep as well, the translation came off just sort of where it needed to be. But yeah, it was intense. And after I left, there was this sense of relief, because there were moments where you would lie awake at night, waking up going, did I cover that properly in the walk-in? Did I put that away right? I mean, it was interesting, but also a great respect for the man, because he was there longer than us. So from a management perspective, I took that with me as well. I'm never to ask anybody to do something I'm not readily able to do or to jump in to do. So.
Right. Okay, all right. So leadership qualities and certainly care for the product. And you said you left there and you had your 2 years of schooling, and what was next?
Then I just worked in various kitchens across the city, made some great relationships. And I met a gentleman who was running a co-op in California, and he was growing cannabis, and he needed edibles for his very sick father who was HIV positive. And he used to dine in my restaurant. So at that point, we became really good friends. And he started asking me a little bit about, products and infusing cannabis. And this was pre, information age with Google, where you could Google how to decarb and how to process marijuana properly. I mean, there were books out, but it was really, this was, 7 years ago. So, I started working with the product from his co-op and taking the trim and infusing it into various edibles. And my father, we just at that point were starting to understand that cannabis could in fact be helpful for him, for the PTSD. And so he became sort of my test case. And I can say that he enjoyed it. But there were some definite overdosages as well as underdosages back in that day, just trying to understand how to manipulate this product as best we could to extract the THC. And then from that, I came up with some pretty amazing products that were just distributed through the co-op to various patients. And it was amazing because you really start to interact with these patients, and working with my father, just even starting to see that, from the amount of medication he was taking at that time to where he's taking right now, 12 pills versus 2. And the fact that he's able to consume cannabis to help manage his PTSD, I really got a really strong, I became really compassionate about it. And then that, I can say, is where the fight started to come from, that the idea that people don't have access to this, and it's something really simple and non-toxic and can actually help in all areas, working closely with some patients who had arthritis, or even those with cancer, or those that just had trouble sleeping. I mean, working in various degrees was a huge learning experience, and helped me sort of develop the love of combining both my culinary love for food and being a fat kid, as well as also trying to offer something that offers this wellness piece. So that was those were fun times for sure.
Yeah, and what just to get into the product of it, what food product was working for you in those early days for the edibles, and were you finding that different food product worked for different conditions? And
yeah, I started making lemonades for cancer patients and those going through chemo because they were having a hard time digesting food products. Your throat gets torn to shit during the chemo process. Everything tastes like salt. Lemon is actually something that helps soothe the throat. So with the lemon and needing some sort of a beverage, I was one of the first ones maybe to come up with an extraction method for beverages. Lemonade was a really good one for those patients. And then my pie bars were something that were light on sugar, not a lot of butter in them, and we could cube them and pack a punch for patients that really needed it, mainly those that had HIV. They get this really intense numbing of the fingers and feet, and they build up such a tolerance to Oxycontins that it actually doesn't help that pain. So we discovered that a heavy indica in this sort of pie bar recipe that I still carry with me now, it won the High Times Cannabis Cup, the first Cannabis Cup here in Colorado, medical marijuana, it won first place for that, and we still get tons of recognition for that product. But that was one that was sort of a sleeper at first, but it really caught on. Of course, classically I started out with a brownie recipe, that was that just age old, we'll make a brownie. And then from that, it just went into, I made lozenges. I started to really get into the chocolatiering. But the lemonade was something that I was really excited about because it gave such relief and such instant, it gave such relief both instantly on the throat soothing with the lemon as well as the medicine that was in there because you could digest it quickly.
Did you call the brownies the Alice B. Toklas brownies? Or?
No, they didn't actually have a name at that time, but they didn't stick around too long. I actually, truth be told, am not a fan of making brownies. I prefer cakes.
Okay, and pies.
And pies, pies and cakes.
All right, so we'll get to nowadays later.
Okay.
But you're working with this co-op and you're working with patients and you're obviously identifying different food product and different delivery methods for the different conditions and the different people. How long were you in that relationship, and then what was the next step?
I was in that relationship for a short period of time, maybe like a year and a half to 2 years. And then Colorado started to take shape. They had just passed medical and they were working on regulations. And, we started paying close attention to what regulations were taking place in Colorado. And it was literally a buddy of mine coming out here and checking it out and coming back to be like, hey, you guys should maybe pay attention to that out there. It is very difficult to build a company on sand. The lack of regulations and the lack of direction that California offers, though the first in the country to go medical, Colorado sort of got in front of them in the sense that they were really going to sort of draft regulations to protect the industry and to create an industry more or less. So it was, around 2009 where we started taking some trips out here. And then, it was literally that same year when it became a no-brainer to make the transition to come out to Colorado.
And how did you come upon that information? Was it information you were looking for? Because I know in New York, we didn't know what was happening here in Colorado in 2009, for instance.
I think it was, there was a tight-knit cannabis community at that time, even smaller than it is now, or smaller than it is now, obviously. But it was just, paying attention to, what Colorado was doing at that time was more press savvy because it was one of the first states to pass medical under this regulatory body. And then my friend had a friend who lived out here. So he had boots on the ground and he was, really focusing on, hey, I know you guys are doing that in California. Maybe you should take a look over here. So it really just happened organically. And then I didn't want to leave California. I sort of dragged my heels in the beginning stages, but the one thing that I thought about was, man, if 5 years from now I find out this was a missed opportunity, I don't think I could have lived with myself. So that is really what pushed me to be like, all right, I'm headed to the Rockies. Here I come.
Okay. And did you jump right in to this company, or were there some other fits and starts, if you will?
No, I came under a former company that I worked with. I came under them. It was the same friend that I was working with out in California. We decided to move to Colorado together. So what was not Mountain Medicine then now became Mountain Medicine. And it was sort of a sister company under this greater shell of a company. And from that, I was going to just solely focus on the edible side of things and set up a MIPS and a kitchen and get product to market. But then what happened was I started working very closely with my former partner, and we were setting up a dispensary and cultivation. And so then it became just sort of a chief operational officer running and setting up operations from inventory management. This was pre-metric, this was pre-state tracking. Mm-hmm. So really not having a sort of template to go off of, sort of creating these infrastructures from inventory management to wholesale distribution to designing a dispensary to training and hiring employees on all areas. So I just sort of became this chief operational officer, and at the same time creating Mountain Medicine, which was going to be 100% of my time and then sort of got pushed aside, though we created some great guerrilla marketing over the past few years. But I spent probably about 5% of my time on that project, and then really started working on developing the dispensary brand and company and infrastructure for that. So that's where the first few years were. Created Cannabis Business Alliance, which is I'm one of the founders of, which is a trade association for the state. When we first came out here, we were working very closely on watching the regulations, and then as the industry began to develop, we sort of saw a need for an industry voice as a whole. So creating that was interesting and amazing, and it's still around, which is a good thing for a trade association. They've still got their feet on the ground, and we have close to 60 members now, and we do a lot of work both locally and at the state level, which is a lot of fun. So,
How long has that been around?
It's been around, I want to say 3 years, maybe 4. Don't quote me on that.
Gotcha. So you got more than a few years. So as far as 2009, 2010, 2011, before the vote, what was it like?
Before the vote, that's how we should peg everything. Before the vote and after the vote. Before the vote, it was Gosh, so much work on just setting up infrastructure, not having access to capital, really trying to just bootstrap everything, putting a team in place, focusing on quality of product from everything being grown to distributing it to the dispensary as well as to other dispensaries, and then focusing on designing the brand and logo for Mountain Medicine. That took about a year to really dial in and sort of understand. I'd never actually branded or marketed anything, and when you really dive into that, you're creating an entity, so you have to be very delicate about how you go about it. It's not just slapping some colors and an image, but really trying to hone in on what you're trying to raise, so to speak. So, what is this child going to look like as a grown-up, and how is it going to sell well to the patients? A lot of it was patient-focused. Compassion program that we utilized in California, we brought with us here. And then doing a lot of work on educating both the public in the neighborhood that we operated in, as well as on a state level, sitting down with representatives and senators and really educating them, because it was still very new, what this looks like. So, and a lot of running around. Those years flew by. It feels like a decade ago. We were just talking about that, but those were really intense years. Just trying to get everything set up and running and not having access to banking or capital, it added for a lot of creative angles, that's for sure, for sure.
Absolutely, yes, and some of those creative angles still going. Then, of course, Amendment 64 passes. How much did that change your operations? Now, this is before, from November 2012 to January 1st, 2014, in between, the year of 2013, basically. What changes did you make, if any?
Well, the straight joy of being in the first state that went recreational was amazing, and then immediately it went into expanding both the dispensary and the edibles company to be able to service recreational clients, our customers. So there were the trainings and setting the operations up to do that, and going through all the regulations, because it is like running two separate companies based off of metric. There are different regulations for each side. So there was a lot of training. And then from the edible side, it was a little difficult because you had to construct different packaging, and you had to have different dosages at different limits. And the edible side was a little more difficult than the cultivation and the dispensary side. It was running two separate POS systems, which virtually run through the same, and then doing sales and all of that, educating the bud tenders on who they could sell to and how much. But on the edible side, it was working heavily on these recipes and marketing, and then designing the packaging for the products.
All right. So what was your day like, January 1st, 2014?
Well, I was hungover from the New Year's Eve party that we had went to, and actually did not purchase cannabis from a recreational dispensary until almost 11:30 at night. I still have the receipt on my fridge right there, right behind you, from my first purchase of recreational cannabis. I can tell you that when it passed in November, the first call I made was to my father. Just the idea that we had been so much a part of a movement, and we still are part of this movement. And I speak about this a lot, that, before an industry, we're a movement, and there's so much work that needs to be done on the drug policy reform side of things, that to get some sort of validation that the people of Colorado have spoken, and that we now have pushed this ball uphill to where now we can create an industry from it. That validation in November was pretty epic, but the purchasing of recreational cannabis was my second favorite, I'd have to say. Just to be able to purchase it recreationally, absolutely. It was a good day.
Yeah. What was your dad's reaction when you called him?
We had a tearful moment on the phone, actually. It was, there were some tears shed. One, he was happy that I was in a state that now went recreational, and two, I was just as happy for him, because this whole time of him sort of sneaking around using cannabis, it just sort of even validated it a little more. And that sort of stereotypical stoner image, though we work really hard on getting rid of, even now, it seemed like it would be easier at that time to make that transition over. But it was a good conversation. Yeah.
Good stuff. And did he make his way out here? Immediately?
My father has access to my frequent flyer account, so he travels frequently. He's supposed to be using it for the grandbabies in San Diego, but I will say, because he is such a cannabis connoisseur, if you will, he does enjoy his visits to the great state of Colorado. He came out shortly after that. He joins me every year for 420. It's sort of a father-daughter thing that we do every year. Most of the time I'm working, but somehow he just tends to find his own group of people to hang with. So he does well for himself when he's here.
He socializes.
He's much like his daughter, a very social person. He likes to hang out.
And what is your mother's take on all of this craziness?
My mother does not consume cannabis. She doesn't drink hardly. She is still a riot to be around, believe it or not. But she's a huge supporter, and she knows that it has brought my father a ton of relief, and it has brought my father back to us, actually. My mother now has the husband that she married, and I have a dad that I didn't really get to experience a whole lot of growing up. It wasn't until I was about 18 or 19 he really started to use cannabis in a way that was effective for him. So she knows that it's a very helpful product, and she hears the stories, and she's seen me go through it as well in building a business in this industry. So she's extremely supportive. I'm still waiting for her to consume with me.
Okay. That'll happen, I guess. Or maybe it won't, and it doesn't matter either way, I guess.
I still ask.
I'll ask every time.
I'll ask every time, Mama.
So you and I were both at the PTSD hearing yesterday at the Colorado Health Board, and I want to talk about that. But you did just bring up growing up with your dad with PTSD and how it was a different personality, I guess, that you were dealing with. Talk about that. What do you mean?
You know, I have a really close relationship to those with PTSD, only because I'm the daughter of a father who had PTSD. So there is distinct personality traits that my father had that most people with PTSD have, and that is aggression, the lack of ability to show emotion, and the inability to be around large groups of people. There's this sort of distance that they do with people, and mainly it's because they're dealing with a lot of traumatic stuff going on, and they're fearful of what happens once they start to unleash conversations. So growing up with my dad, he was very distant. He had bits of rage and anger growing up. We speak very openly about it now. There was very little sense of humor going on, very little connection, and that was just mainly because he wanted to keep us at a distance because he didn't want to hurt us. You know, it's a really solitary sickness, and it's not a sickness, but it's a really solitary experience that people with PTSD have, and they're often misunderstood as being selfish, right? Like, so they come across as just being all about themselves and very one-channel focused, but truth be told, that's not the case. It's a defense mechanism that they have. Suffering very traumatic episodes and events in your life, and then being told to buck up, soldier, move on, you know, this sort of mentality of not being able to experience that emotion as it happens creates such a long-term damage for most people. And the thing that has been most effective for my father is cannabis. I mean, the idea that he's able to smoke something that relieves anxiety and relieves stress and also helps him to forget and helps him to sleep at night has created this whole different person. And I didn't know who my father was until I was probably about 22. And the man that I have now in my life is this loving, caring, engaging man who cries when he shows up and cries when we drop him off at the airport and demands that I FaceTime him. And if I don't respond to a text message, he's on an airplane. I mean, I have this like just amazing relationship with him that cannabis has brought my father back to me and my mother and my two sisters. I mean, it's amazing. So sitting at that hearing yesterday is very much a personal. I mean, the whole reason I was there is because it needs to happen. It needs to be added to the registry. And it also reminds me, too, of what we're really fighting for, you know, and it goes back to, yes, it's an industry, but there are still so many wrongs that have to be corrected as we go forward.
Yeah. And PTSD is still not a recognized condition for medical cannabis in the state of Colorado. Came up a few times that 11 states already have the condition on their registries. And, you know, talk about some of the testimony and what you got out of that.
So many powerful people testifying. Most of them were veterans of various wars. And the one thing I took away from that is these people were basically pleading for validation and some sort of recognition from the state to allow them to use it for its medicated use, medical use. I mean, the gentleman with the 2 boys, there were 2 gentlemen that actually got up to testify with children, and that really hit me too, because it is so true. The cannabis is allowing them to be engaging with their families and to bring them back to their families. The other thing I took away from that was there was testimony about the amount of money that we spend on war and how we spend very little money in terms of fixing what we break when we're over there, and that being our soldiers. I mean, it pulls at the heart with the idea that the amount of money that we spend on weapons and infrastructure in place to manage wars, but we're not willing to spend any sort of research or time or energy on what happens when they come back. And we have so much testimony and validation from the nation in terms of cannabis being something very effective, non-toxic, non-addicting, and it can be offered to these soldiers to offer relief even in the first 60 to 90 days of transition. And a lot of them don't have that capability. So it was very powerful, actually. And I sat next to you, and I even told you, I said, I don't think it's going to pass.
Right.
You know, I sat there. I follow Colorado very closely because it's the state I live in, but the Department of Health has always hung their hat on the fact that they have a one-way path of getting things introduced, and there's no clinical studies to validate that this is an effective use for it. There's no long-term studies to show both the pro and the con for it. And it's very frustrating because Colorado had the opportunity to actually allow for studies to be done, right? And they chose not to. So,
Now, having said that, they have funded Dr. Sue Sisley, and we sat down and talked to her, and she, explained that that's great that she has that money, but she can't do anything until NIDA gives her federally, distributed marijuana, which they are kind of holding off on. So it is a cart and horse type of thing, which is, will give us the research and then we'll pass it, but we can't do the research because we can't get the, the federal cannabis.
it's from the naysayers, it is the kick the can down the road and let somebody else figure it out. Sue is waiting for product that is readily grown in the state right now by some of the most amazing growers in the country, right? And the idea that she can't have access to that rather than waiting for the federal government to approve some sort of allocated medication for her to use is completely ridiculous. And I think that's what I was saying too with this idea that if the department were willing to pass PTSD as being a viable, then we could actually maybe start to do some research here in the state of Colorado. And it's a shame that they're not as forward thinkers as the rest of us in the state seem to be. So.
Indeed. And we'll keep track and see what happens with the vote. Getting back to the 2 gentlemen with children, the one guy who said, he had a suit on and he said, I'm not rough around the edges. I've shaved off all of my facial hair and my son has his dad back. You said something very similar to that about your dad. As far as cannabis use, is it a night and day thing? Was it, a rolling effect? Did it take a couple months, a year? Describe that.
I think it was the conversation that when I started working with the co-op, I started having access to all these patients who needed it. And then it was this understanding of my father has actually been using this whole time for wellness and we didn't realize it, And from that point, then it became a conversation of maybe we should try this and try this dosage. And, he has a really high tolerance for cannabis. So it was trying to find an edible that could carry him throughout the day and something that would allow him to be functional as well. So having access to the patients first and then talking with them and hearing their stories, then it became this sort of aha moment where I was like, my father's been doing this whole time and we didn't realize it was for medical purposes. And I think a lot of that is what's come from cannabis, that how people consume it and why people consume it is an education process right now because a lot, it came from the black market and it's considered a Schedule I drug and it's, you're a drug addict if you use it, though we don't clearly believe that, but then you start to really understand why you use it and for what you use it for. So that's how that happened. It happened sort of very organically. And then constructing edibles, and now it's his preferred choice of medication. I mean,
what food product or what edible worked for him? And then again, how long did it take when he started using that edible for things to kind of become a little bit sunnier?
I would say it was probably about a year from the time he started with the edibles, because before he was just smoking, and then sort of figuring out what the dosage was. And then he had some pretty progressive doctors, being in California, no pun intended to everywhere else, but there was some sort of progressive thought around cannabis. So working with them, and it's a lot of work to get off certain medications, especially those that handle PTSD. A lot of it is antidepressants or antipsychotic medications. So there's a bit of a withdrawal and a slowly getting off of them conversation. So that was tracked very heavily through a doctor. But it was probably about a year to a year and a half where we really started to stabilize what he needed to take versus what he needed to take pharmaceutically. So, and he went from, a handful of pills to just 2 a day. So.
Fantastic. And what, again, what was that product, that edible?
Well, we originally started out with the pie bar, of course, of which he doesn't have access to anymore because he's not in the state of Colorado. But when he comes and visits, he purchases the pie bars.
And just let's do the plug. What's the pie bar?
The pie bar, they come in 3 different flavors. They come in cinnamon, blueberry, and cherry. They're absolutely delicious, and if you put them in the microwave for just 15 seconds, a little scoop of ice cream on top, you've got yourself a pie a la mode.
Excellent. What kind of dosage are we talking about in the?
Well, on the medical side, they're about 200 milligrams. So they are for the very serious patient to medicate with. Know your dose, go low, go slow.
That's right. Start low, go slow, right?
Start low, go slow.
Let's get into all of the edible conversation, but just quickly, what's the dosage on the rec side for the pie bars?
Well, the pie bars aren't actually offered on the rec side,
okay.
Which is interesting. They should be. I don't know why they aren't. On the rec side, we offer a line of chocolates, and those are all at the 80 milligram mark. And then on the medical side, I have various different dosages. Okay. Anything from 200 milligrams to 50 milligrams. My peanut butter pie bar is probably my top seller on the medical side, and my salted dark chocolate on the rec side. Those are my two top sellers.
Excellent. I'm getting hungry listening to this. And I guess what we'll do is we'll just wait for those pie bars on the rec side. It sounds like we just might have had an epiphany.
I might have just had a realization. I'm calling to the kitchen now to figure out how we can design that child-resistant packaging for the pie bars. Yes.
There you go. You get yourself a canister.
I like it.
All right. So let's talk about edibles and how much you guys are doing to educate the public, to educate the consumer, because we've spoken with a few edibles folks, all of whom you know, and the Julies and all of that.
Right.
Yeah. So with packaging, what are you specifically doing, and how is it all going?
On the medical side, we're not as restricted. So it's a lot easier on the medical side. I custom made originally these beautiful boxes. I mean, they're custom made. They come in rectangular and then in square shapes with a really good brand on them. And I love the aesthetic of the packaging. When recreational hit, I had to reconstruct the packaging into easily identifiable 10 milligram dosage. And then each 10 milligram dosage had to be child resistant. So what a lot of companies do are use pharmaceutical bottles, which are the easier way to package child-resistant products. I didn't want to do that, so I spent a little extra money on custom designing blister packs and then making sure that the outer packaging mirrored the medical packaging so that the brand integrity was still there. So I spent probably about 3 months prior to the recreational regs going into place, which was February 1st of this year. So there was a lot of research and development into how do you make something child resistant but still make it look cool at the same time and user friendly. So that's what I came up with. I worked with an amazing company, AssuraPack. They do custom packaging for our industry. They're awesome. They're women-ran business, and they were really helpful in the beginning stages in terms of designing it. But the interesting thing is, when we mention pie bars, you have all these great ideas for the recreational side, and then you get into the regulations. So it's like, yeah, that's a great product. How do you package it? So on the board at work, we have this great ideas board, and the very top of it is, remember, we have to put it in a package. So like how that plays, you know?
So that is part of the product development.
It is a huge part of the product development, because if you come up with a genius idea for, I don't know, a cupcake or ice cream or a beverage, you have to remember, one, how many milligrams are you going to serve to the patient, or I'm sorry, to the customer, and then how are you going to package it in an efficient way? So there are a lot of interesting things that come into the edible side of things. There's not a lot of market research that we can pull from in terms of what products sell and why. So that's difficult. So when you're doing the R&D and the research development on the recipe side, you try to figure out things that are new and innovative and all of that, but still sort of blind in terms of what the consumer actually wants versus what they need, you know?
The want and need on the consumer side, especially the recreational, especially your tourists, let's just give them what we need to give them, as opposed to what they think they want.
Right, exactly. If it all worked in our way, it would just be, this is what you get. But unfortunately, consumers, and I'm the same way, are very finicky, you know? What they want and what they need are two separate things. They may not even fully understand it, but the crazy thing and the great thing is that, you know, I work in such a competitive environment on the edible side that, you know, those of us that make it, and I hope I'm here in the end, but if not, it'll be a great story. Then I'll sell a book, maybe. You can help me write it. But the idea is, you know, how do you keep ahead of the curve, right? So what's coming, what's new, and what competitive edge can you capture? But at the same time, you're sort of flying blind, because, you know, this is an unresearched market as it stands. So we're sort of creating that as we go.
Totally. Just looking at the time here, and we don't have much more of it, sadly, very sadly.
It just flew right by.
I know.
We didn't even get into the slapstick comedy or when you and I are going to consume together, because, you know, I don't think we have.
Right. We have not, and I'm running to the airport, so that is going to have to be next time.
Next time we'll have to consume in the state of Colorado, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Or Washington State.
Or Washington State, yes.
Or possibly Vancouver, as we just discussed.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
You're having. I'm looking forward to that event. Actually, I've always wanted to go to Vancouver.
There we go. All right, so let's ask you the final questions. There are 3 of them, and I'm going to say what they are, and then I'm going to ask if we missed anything.
Okay.
Right. So the 3 questions are: what has most surprised you in cannabis? What has most surprised you in life? And then further to your life, in terms of the soundtrack of your life, can you please name at least one song that's on that soundtrack? So those are the 3 questions. But before we ask those, in all seriousness, in terms of what we missed, I feel like we know, you know, Mountain Medicine now. I feel like we know Jamie. I feel like you've got a very specific background and an interesting one with a dad that has PTSD and a bunch of friends that have PTSD, and that has driven you to you know, do what you do. So that is it's nice to know that there is a solution in mind from you know, from the Billy Goat, right?
Absolutely. That this was a movement before it was an industry, I think, is the key to all of what I have try to hold on to. I don't think there's anything that we missed. I mean, you know.
Good, and I think that it's still a movement is a point that I'd like to make.
I hope that it continues down that path, and that as more states come on board with regulations and drafting regulations, that we allow for a bit of a diversity aspect in this and the decriminalization on many levels. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we'll see how that all goes, and maybe we'll talk again. But in terms of what has most surprised you in cannabis, what's that answer?
Well, the biggest fucking shock to me was that the state of Colorado legalized marijuana before California. I'm happy to say that I made the right move to come to Colorado, to be sitting in a state that is fully legal and has an amazing regulatory body, and I am as much a Coloradian as I am a Californian. That was the biggest shock to me, that I thought for sure my brothers and sisters in California they were going to pull it off first. Yeah. So that was the biggest shock, and I made the right choice. Yeah. I mean, you know, that being said, yes.
All right. And I guess we'll just give them a bunch of months there in California, and they should be catching up soon, right?
They'll be catching up really soon. You hear that? You brothers and sisters out there, you better pass something.
Exactly.
Pass something.
Exactly. What has most surprised you in life, Jamie Lewis?
That I am actually working in the cannabis industry. I think most people would say that, but that I took a love for cooking and combined it with a love for consuming and work in this amazing emerging industry. 20 years ago, would have never thought this is where I would be.
You literally have the perfect job for you.
Right. I mean, food and cannabis, and I get to put pretty stuff in boxes. I mean, it's amazing. And Billy, I mean, that he's my muse for the packaging, but I feel very blessed. It's a rough, tough industry. It's very competitive, and it's been an amazing ride. So I've enjoyed every step of it.
All right, so that ride, name at least one song that is on the soundtrack of your life.
Wanda Jackson, Fujiyama Mama. That would be my go-to. That's the song that plays in my head, like that Rocky theme song. Yeah. So that's an actually easy question for me, because I ask that question all the time. Actually, what's your go-to song? Although how I ask it is, and it's harder to answer this way, but in the end, if you were to have one song play over and over again, what would it be? Yeah. So because you really got to love it to hear it.
Wanda Jackson, Fujiyama Mama.
Yes. If you don't know it, you should get it. It's also great in a ringtone. So.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go download that now.
Yeah. Can we get that as the theme song to play right before the interview comes on?
I think we would have to pay for that.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah.
Wanda's cool. She doesn't mind.
Okay.
She's old school rockabilly. Just tell her Jamie Lewis said it was cool.
That's what we'll do. Yeah. Jamie Lewis, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Well, there you have it. The Jamie Lewis. Really great to take some time and talk to Jamie about what she's done in the industry and how she's built her company and what she's thinking in terms of PTSD and really where we're going, as cannabis, as medicine.